Welcome to Crisis in Perception, where we examine the systems shaping our world.
And today, we are turning our analytical lens toward what is probably the oldest, most resilient, and, well, definitely the most controversial institutional framework in human history.
Yeah, and before anyone panics or checks the title and assumes we're about to deliver a sermon or a shouting match, we really need to be specific about our approach today.
Absolutely.
Because we aren't here to debate theology in the traditional sense.
No, not at all. We are not sitting here asking if a burning bush can actually speak, or, if water can chemically turn into wine, or if the Red Sea parted.
Okay.
Those are questions for theologians or maybe historians. That is not what this is.
Exactly. We are systems thinkers. We look at incentives, we map feedback loops, and we trace structural outcomes. So the question for this deep dive isn't, is God real? The question we're asking is, how does the institution of organized religion function as a system of authority?
Right. We are conducting a structural audit. And our guide for this audit is the book, The Atheist Manifesto, Reason, Rights, and the Poison of Religion, which is sometimes published under the title God is Not Great by the late Christopher Hitchens.
A man who was never accused of having a lukewarm opinion.
No, never. Hitchens was a firebrand, a massive polemicist, and an incredible debater. But underneath the rhetoric, he was a rigorous observer of power.
Which is exactly the mission for today. We're treating his work not just as a critique of belief, but really as a blueprint, because Hitchens maps out the architecture of what he calls a celestial dictatorship.
Celestial dictatorship. It is a heavy phrase, but it immediately reframes the entire conversation from personal spirituality to institutional politics.
It really does. And our goal is to trace that map for you today. We want to understand how the system designs its authority, how it incentivizes submission, what's the carrot and what's the stick, and how it produces specific predictable outcomes that we frankly see in the headlines every single day.
Right. And to do that, we have to look at the core conflict Hitchens identifies. He argues that this isn't simply a battle between believers and atheists. It is a conflict between two competing operating systems for human civilization.
Two completely different ways to organize society.
Exactly. On one side, you have the celestial dictatorship, which is a system of total, unalterable control. And on the other side, you have Enlightenment values, reason, skepticism, individual rights, and the separation of powers.
Okay, so if we are treating this as a system architecture, we should start at the foundation. How is this system designed? Hitchens opens with a metaphor that is pretty visceral. He compares the religious worldview to living in a celestial North Korea.
It is an image that just stops you in your tracks. But structurally speaking, he argues it's the most accurate comparison available.
Walk me through the mechanics of that, because when you think of North Korea, you think of starvation, a demilitarized zone, a massive cult of personality. How does that actually map onto a spiritual belief system?
Well, think about the defining features of a totalitarian state. What makes a regime totalitarian rather than just authoritarian?
I suppose it's the reach. The state is everywhere. You have the dear leader whose picture is in every single room. And you have this constant requirement for praise. You really can't opt out of it.
Precisely. Hitchens says if you take those exact features and scale them up to infinity, you get the religious framework. In these monotheistic systems, you have a supreme leader who is not elected.
And cannot be voted out, a permanent executive.
Permanent, absolute, and utterly unchallengeable. There is no parliament to check his power. There is no judiciary you can appeal to. And just like the earthly dictatorship, there is a requirement for constant compulsory praise.
You must thank the leader for the sun, the rain, your food, your life.
Yes, you have to actively praise the regime just for existing.
It's interesting you use the word compulsory, because usually people frame prayer and worship as an act of love. But the structural argument here is that if you have to do it, if the alternative to praising the leader is infinite punishment, then it's not love, it's tribute.
It is coerced submission. And here is where the celestial North Korean metaphor gets truly terrifying from a systems perspective. In a human dictatorship, the surveillance actually has limits.
Right. The secret police can bug your phone or watch your house, but they can't see inside your head.
Exactly. You can sit in a room in Pyongyang, smile at the portrait of the leader, and secretly hate the regime. You have a private sanctuary inside your own mind.
But in the celestial system, the surveillance is 24/7.
And it is completely internal. The deity knows your thoughts before you even form them. He knows your secret desires. He watches you while you sleep. Hitchens describes it as a celestial eye that never blinks.
So it operates like the ultimate panopticon. The prison design, where the inmate assumes they are always being watched, so they end up policing themselves.
Exactly. It's the ultimate internalization of control. The supervisor is literally inside your head. But Hitchens makes one final, really chilling distinction between the earthly dictatorship and the celestial one.
Which is?
In North Korea, as horrific as it is, there is an escape hatch. You can die.
Morbid, but structurally true. The state's jurisdiction ends at the grave. They can't hurt you once you're gone.
But in the religious system, death is not an escape. Death is actually where the real trial begins. The jurisdiction is infinite. It pursues you into the afterlife.
So we are looking at a system of permanent supervision that you can never, ever opt out of.
That is the structural design, a closed loop of absolute authority. But to make this palatable, to get people to accept a system of total control, you need a very specific psychological hook. And that brings us to the dynamic of the gift.
The gift. You see this on greeting cards all the time. Life is a gift. It sounds very benign.
It's a fantastic marketing slogan, but Hitchens deconstructs the actual transaction taking place. Imagine I come to your house, I knock on your door, and I hand you a wildly expensive, incredibly high-maintenance object that you never asked for.
Okay.
And then I tell you, because I gave you this thing, you now owe me 10% of your income, your Sundays, and your absolute obedience for the rest of your life.
I mean, I'd call the police. That is a debt trap. It's a protection racket.
Exactly. And Hitchens points out that you were created without your consent. You were thrown into a game you didn't vote on, bound by rules you didn't write. Yet the system claims you owe a debt of gratitude that can never actually be repaid.
Because the value of the gift, which is life itself, is infinite.
Right. You are born into a structural deficit. You are born in the red. The concept of original sin in Christian doctrine is the perfect example of this. You arrive guilty.
That is incredibly heavy when you frame it as an institutional mechanism. It creates a relationship of permanent leverage over the individual.
Permanent servitude, because if you can never pay off the debt, you never truly own yourself, you are structurally the property of the creditor. Hitchens doesn't pull punches here. He calls it a form of slavery that we are taught to welcome.
Okay, so we have a totalitarian structure fueled by an unpayable debt. But any system of authority needs a claim to legitimacy. In a democracy, the legitimacy is the vote. In a monarchy, it's royal blood. What is the claim to legitimacy here?
Hitchens calls it epistemic authority.
Epistemic meaning relating to knowledge.
Yes. The system claims legitimacy by asserting that a select group of people, the clergy, the prophets, the institution itself, has access to supernatural information that is denied to everyone else.
It's the I have a direct line to the CEO claim.
Basically. And Hitchens was razor sharp on this. He would say, essentially, I do not admit that any other primate or mammal has access to privileged information about the cosmos that I do not have.
It is a staggering institutional claim when you think about it. To say, I know exactly what the creator of 100 billion galaxies thinks about your diet.
Or your sex life. Or what you do on a Friday night. It is the claim to know the mind of God. And this claim grants the institution a specific mechanism of control, which theologians refer to as the power to bind and loose.
Bind and loose, that sounds like legal terminology.
It effectively is. It is the power to bind you to your sins, to condemn you, or to loose you from them, granting salvation. If you truly believe that a priest or an institution holds the literal keys to your eternal fate, they have absolute leverage over your behavior.
The ultimate centralization of power. You can't go direct to the source. You are forced to go through the license broker.
Exactly. And this reliance on revealed truth creates a massive structural flaw, especially as human knowledge advances. It creates rigidity. Think about how we operate in science.
Science is entirely about updating. We thought the Earth was the center of the universe. Evidence changed. We updated the model. We thought bad air caused disease. We found germs. We updated the model.
Hitchens calls that radical uncertainty. We know what we know until we find out we're wrong. But the religious system is built on the opposite. Radical certainty.
Because if the book was authored or dictated by God, it fundamentally cannot be wrong.
Right. The file on truth was closed thousands of years ago. The system cannot update itself. It treats ancient texts written by people who thought the sun revolved around the earth and didn't know what a germ was as the final, unalterable word on physical reality.
So when our understanding of reality changes, the system has to fight the new information.
It has no choice but to fight it. Because to admit the text is wrong about the origin of the earth or the cosmos is to admit the text isn't divine. If you pull one thread, the entire authority structure unravels.
Which perfectly explains the institutional hostility toward evolutionary biology or cosmology. It isn't just a polite disagreement about facts. It is an existential threat to the institution's epistemic authority.
Precisely. So we have mapped the design, the celestial North Korea, we have the leverage, the unpayable debt of the gift, and we have the legitimacy claim, secret knowledge. But a system like this doesn't just run on autopilot. You have to actively incentivize the population to stay in line.
You need an economy of conformity.
Yes. Let's look at that economy. Hitchens spent decades debating religious leaders, and there was one argument he encountered constantly: the divine mandate.
The idea that without God, we can't be moral. If there's no divine lawgiver, anything goes argument.
Exactly. But look at the incentive structure that argument actually reveals. It tells the adherent, you are not capable of being good on your own. Your morality isn't an internal compass. It is a lease from management.
It's a deeply cynical view of humanity. It implies we are all just psychopaths on a tight leash.
Hitchens found it deeply insulting. He argued that it actually destroys personal moral agency. If you are only refraining from murder because you are terrified of the big policeman in the sky, are you genuinely a moral person? Or are you just compliant?
That distinction between moral and compliant is crucial for a systems analysis. If I don't steal from you because I have empathy and don't want to cause harm, that's morality. If I don't steal because I think a hidden camera is recording me, that's just self-preservation.
And this compliance is driven by the oldest incentive loop imaginable, the carrot and the stick.
But in this specific system, the stick is infinite.
Yes, and that is a key systems point. In a civil legal system, the punishment generally scales with the crime. You steal a car, you go to jail for a set time. In the religious framework, the punishment for a thought crime or for mere disbelief is eternal torture.
An infinite multiplier on the punishment side.
And on the reward side, infinite bliss. Hitchens loved to deconstruct the paradise incentive, specifically the martyrdom promises that drive extremist jihadism.
The promise of the 72 virgins.
Yes. He would point this out with a mix of genuine horror and dark humor. He noted that some linguistic scholars suggest the Aramaic word used in the text might not actually translate to virgins at all, but rather to white raisins or grapes.
Wait, so structurally, the system might be convincing people to strap a bomb to their chest for a fruit bowl.
It highlights the absurdity of the transaction, but structurally it is the perfect scam.
Because the payout is entirely delayed.
Delayed until after the user is destroyed. You pay with your life the most valuable asset you have, and the system promises a reward that fundamentally cannot be verified. There's no better business bureau for the afterlife.
It is a completely unverifiable contract.
But there is another incentive, one that pays out immediately, right here on Earth, and that is the incentive of ego.
Ego. That seems counterintuitive. You usually associate religious systems with enforced humility. I'm but a humble servant.
Hitchens argues that humility is a pose. Underneath it is a massive, staggering vanity. The system looks at you and says, the entire universe, billions of light years across, black holes, exploding stars, all of it was designed specifically for you.
The creator of the cosmos cares intimately about who you sleep with.
He counts the hairs on your head. It centers the human individual as the absolute main character of the cosmos. Hitchens argues this is an incredibly intoxicating incentive. It solves the problem of insignificance. Science tells us we are a chemical accident on a minor planet in the suburbs of a very average galaxy.
Which admittedly can feel a bit isolating.
It can, but religion steps in and says, no, you are the center of the play. The universe is a stage built for your moral drama. That creates a sense of centrality that people are fiercely desperate to protect.
So the incentives are tightly calibrated. Fear, unverifiable reward, and massive ego gratification. But institutions, once they are built and humming, have one primary directive above all else.
Survival. Institutional self-preservation.
And this is where Hitchens gets incredibly forensic. He was writing and speaking extensively about this during the height of the Catholic Church abuse scandals. He used that specific crisis to analyze the system's true priorities.
It is a brutal case study in systems behavior. You had an institution that claimed to be the ultimate guardian of absolute morality, and yet when faced with the systemic abuse of children by its own clergy, what did the institution do?
It moved the offending priests around. It covered it up.
It prioritized the protection of the hierarchy over the safety of the vulnerable. Hitchens points out the glaring moral relativism of the system here.
Which is a complete flip. Usually it's the religious institutions accusing secular society of moral relativism. The idea that without divine law, you just make up the rules as you go.
Hitchens flips the board entirely. He asks, who are the real relativists? The institution is absolutely rigid about things that threaten its doctrinal power. If a woman uses contraception, she is challenging the doctrine. That is a hardline sin.
She gets excommunicated.
But if a priest destroys the life of a child, the system treats that as manageable. If a fascist regime is exterminating millions, the institution can sign a concordat with them, as the Vatican did in the 1930s.
So the severity of the sin isn't measured by the harm done to a human being. It's measured by the threat it poses to the system's authority.
That is the textbook definition of institutional relativism, and it proves structurally that the primary function of the system is not morality. It is the preservation of power.
This brings us to the inevitable output of such a framework. We've mapped the design, we've analyzed the incentives, now we have to look at the predictable outcomes. And Hitchens makes the case that violence is not a glitch in the software, that is a feature.
He proves this with the thought experiment he calls a Rorschach test for the modern world.
I remember reading this passage. He describes a truly terrifying home invasion scenario.
Yes. Picture this. An old man, a grandfather, is at home babysitting his 5-year-old granddaughter. Suddenly, a man breaks through the door. He has an axe in one hand and a knife in the other. He is screaming. He is hunting them down.
It's an absolute nightmare. The grandfather barely manages to shove the little girl into a bathroom and lock the door just as the wood starts splintering from the axe blows.
Now, Hitchens asks a very simple question. What is your reaction to this scene? If you are a person with a functioning moral compass, your reaction is pure revulsion. You see a monster attacking innocent people.
Right, there's zero moral ambiguity in that scenario.
But then, Hitchens reveals the context. The grandfather was a Danish cartoonist, he's referring to the Kurt Westergaard incident, who had drawn a picture that offended a religious group. The man with the axe was a religious fundamentalist acting on that offense.
And suddenly, the global reaction shifted completely.
It did. Hitchens cites articles from major liberal newspapers, statements from politicians, from other religious leaders, and the tone wasn't just pure condemnation of the attacker. It was, well, we have to understand the anger. He shouldn't have drawn the cartoon. He provoked them.
They relativized the attempted murder of a grandfather and a 5-year-old child.
Because of the divine warrant. This is the structural outcome we have to grapple with. If you believe you are acting on direct orders from the supreme commander of the universe, your normal moral inhibitors are entirely bypassed.
It just overrides the human conscience.
It shuts it off. Hitchens calls it a warrant for murder. If God tells you to kill, then killing is no longer murder. It is justice. It is a holy act.
So when we see things like the fatwa on Salman Rushdie or suicide bombings or so-called honor killings,
we aren't looking at madness. We are looking at people who are logically following the incentive structures of their system. If you truly deeply believe the creator of the universe wants a specific person dead, who are you to disobey?
that is a terrifying structural reality. It means the system creates a unique category of wickedness that simply wouldn't exist without it.
Which perfectly sets up Hitchens' famous amateur challenge.
Oh, I love this part.
Yeah.
This is something you can literally try right now as you listen.
It's a challenge he issued to audiences all over the world during his debates. It has two parts. Part 1, name a moral action performed or a moral statement uttered by a believer that could not be performed or uttered by a non-believer.
Okay, let's play it out. Charity.
Atheists give to charity constantly.
Self-sacrifice.
Secular people have thrown themselves on grenades for their friends, their countries, their families.
Kindness. Radical forgiveness.
All entirely available to the secular mind. Hitchens claims he never received a satisfactory answer to Part 1. It strongly suggests that morality is innate to our species. It's biological, it's social, it's evolutionary. We don't require the celestial dictatorship to be good to each other.
But then comes Part 2, the corollary.
Can you think of a wicked action performed or a wicked statement made specifically because of religious faith?
And suddenly the list is instant.
Genital mutilation of children, suicide bombings in crowded markets.
Denying basic medical treatment to a dying child because it's, quote-unquote, God's will.
Persecuting people, ruining their lives over their private sexuality. Attempting to accelerate geopolitics to bring about an apocalyptic prophecy.
The system creates a permission structure for atrocities that reason and human empathy would never sanction. You don't see people flying planes into skyscrapers in the name of secular humanism.
Or architecture, or botany. The unique activating ingredient is the divine warrant.
And Hitchens doesn't let mainstream or moderate religion off the hook here either. He goes right after the root of what we culturally consider religious morality, the Ten Commandments.
Decalogue. We are conditioned to view this text as the absolute bedrock of Western civilization.
But Hitchens analyzes it as a record of callousness and greed, which is a really jarring take for a lot of people.
Well, let's look at the structure of the text itself. What are the first 4 commandments?
I am the Lord thy God. Thou shalt have no other gods before me, no graven images, and don't take the Lord's name in vain.
Do those sound like universal moral rules to you, or do they sound like the insecure demands of an ancient, jealous king?
They're purely loyalty oaths.
Exactly. They are about the ego of the deity. They have absolutely nothing to do with how human beings treat each other. They are solely focused on maintaining the authority structure.
And what about the rest? Don't steal, don't covet.
Hitchens categorizes those as proprietorial. Don't touch my stuff. Don't touch my wife, who, by the way, is explicitly listed alongside the cattle and the property in the text.
And he points out what is glaringly missing from this ultimate moral bedrock.
Where is do not rape? Where is the commandment saying do not mistreat children? Where is do not keep slaves? Where is do not commit genocide?
Those seem like pretty significant omissions for the creator of the universe writing the ultimate rule book.
Especially since the exact same books that contain those commandments go on to explicitly regulate slavery, detailing exactly how hard you can beat enslaved people and order genocidal campaigns against neighboring tribes.
So if the structural design is totalitarian, the incentives are manipulative, and the outcomes predictably bypass human empathy, why does it persist? Why are we still running this Bronze Age software in the modern world?
Hitchens identifies several persistence mechanisms, feedback loops that keep the system running. The primary one is indoctrination and early adoption.
The Mrs. Watts mechanism.
Yes, he tells this story from his own childhood to illustrate the point. He was about 9 years old, sitting in a nature class with a teacher named Mrs. Watts. She holds up a green leaf and says to the class, "Isn't it wonderful that God made the leaves green? Because green is the color that is most restful to our eyes."
And young Christopher, even at 9 years old, thinks, wait a minute.
He realized instinctively that she had it backwards. Our eyes evolved to see the spectrum of light that was most abundantly available, which was bouncing off the vegetation. But Mrs. Watts was actively installing the argument from design.
The system persists because it fundamentally bypasses adult critical faculties by getting to people before those faculties even develop. It exploits the biological vulnerability of childhood.
It creates deep cognitive path dependency. If you install the operating system of faith before the software of critical thinking and scientific inquiry can be downloaded, the faith software becomes the foundation upon which everything else has to run.
But it isn't just maintained in the classroom or the family. It is tightly coupled with political and cultural power.
Institutional coupling, the fusion of church and state. Hitchens points out that these systems don't just rely on spiritual faith to survive, they rely heavily on tax exemptions.
Which operates as a massive structural subsidy paid by the non-believer to support the institution of the believer.
Exactly, and they rely on blasphemy laws. The system demands legal protection from criticism. It demands a special cultural status of respect.
The demand that faith must be respected. Hitchens absolutely categorically refused to grant that.
Because he viewed the demand for respect as a demand for silence. The system says, you cannot question my claims because they are sacred. That cultural shield protects the institution from the exact same rigorous scrutiny we apply to every other system: politics, economics, medicine, science.
So the system entrenches itself legally, culturally, and psychologically.
Okay.
And this brings us to the macro level, the interconnection. How does the system interact with larger nested systems, specifically geopolitics?
Hitchens was writing during the post-9/11 era, a time of intense global conflict, and he viewed the quote-unquote war on terror not just as a geopolitical struggle, but as a literal collision of religious systems.
He described the axis of evil as fundamentally theocratic.
Look at the regimes he focused on: Iran, the Taliban. These are violent attempts to implement the celestial North Korea directly on Earth, but he also applied this analytical lens to the Israel-Palestine conflict.
He quotes an Israeli diplomat, Abba Eban, who pointed out that the conflict structurally is actually quite simple to solve. 2 groups of people, 2 states, you just partition the land.
Rationally, secularly, it is a border dispute. Border disputes can be negotiated, but the moment you introduce the religious system into the equation, it becomes totally insoluble. Why? Because one side, or extreme factions on both sides, believes God explicitly gave them the land. You cannot negotiate a border with God.
The concept of God-given land makes rational compromise impossible. The religious system acts as an absolute spoiler for the geopolitical system.
Exactly. And this is where Hitchens introduces the counter system. If the religious framework is built on unalterable authority and coerced submission, what is the alternative design? It isn't just atheism in a vacuum. It is constitutional secularism.
Enter Thomas Paine.
Hitchens holds Thomas Paine up as the architect of the alternative. Paine, Jefferson, Madison. They design a counter-institution based on the rights of man and the age of reason, the concept of the wall of separation.
We hear separation of church and state as a political slogan all the time, but Hitchens sees it as a profound structural necessity. It's a design feature meant to patrol the frontier between mind and state.
Jefferson's design was brilliant. He refused to let the state subsidize any church. He essentially said, if your religious system is so profound and true, let it survive on voluntary support. Let it survive in the marketplace of ideas.
No state coercion. No mandatory tax money funding the dogma.
This forces the religious system to operate as a voluntary association rather than a totalitarian mandate. It breaks the monopoly on power.
But there is one force that challenges the static religious system even more fundamentally than the U.S. Constitution, and that is the scientific method.
The crisis of knowledge. The religious system was designed for and relies upon a very small, static universe. A universe centered on humanity, created a few thousand years ago, monitored by a deity deeply concerned with our daily habits.
And then comes the Hubble telescope.
Then comes the discovery of the expanding universe. We find out that the universe is accelerating apart. We discover the heat death of the sun, that it will eventually boil the oceans dry. We map the collision course of the Andromeda Galaxy with our own Milky Way.
It reveals a cosmos that is violent, wasteful, and unimaginably massive.
And the sheer scale of that reality renders the religious claims structurally absurd. Hitchens asks the devastating question, if the divine plan was to save humanity, why weigh 98,000 years of human misery, disease, suffering, and death before finally intervening in a small, illiterate part of the Middle East?
It just completely fails to fit the data. And Hitchens completely rejects the popular compromise. Stephen Jay Gould's concept of non-overlapping magisteria, or NOMA, the idea that science deals with physical facts and religion deals with moral values, so they don't conflict.
Hitchens says that is a total cop-out. Religion absolutely does make claims about the physical world. It claims a virgin birth. It claims a physical resurrection. It claims the earth was created in 6 days and that a global flood wiped out humanity. These are testable physical claims. Science has dismantled them. You cannot retreat to a metaphorical bunker only after your foundational texts have been debunked by telescopes and microscopes.
So we have mapped the architecture of this system. We see the totalitarian design, we see the ego-driven and fear-based incentives, the violent, predictable outcomes, and its ultimate collision with reason and science. What is the crisis in perception here?
The crisis is that we're looking at a massive system of totalitarian authority, but we are perceiving it as a benign cultural artifact.
We see the community bake sales, the choir practice, the charity drives.
Exactly. We perceive religion as a private faith, as community glue, or as the default source of human morality. We have been deeply conditioned to view it as something that inherently deserves our automatic respect and deference.
But the structural reality operating beneath that veneer is completely different.
The structural reality is that it is an institutional system demanding the complete surrender of your critical faculties. It is a system that demands you accept radical certainty without a shred of testable evidence.
And when we see the systemic atrocities, whether it's the Axis attack on the cartoonist or the global cover-up of child abuse by the hierarchy, our surface interpretation fails us. We say, oh, those are just bad apples, or that isn't true religion.
That is the exact failure of perception. We miss the underlying incentive architecture that makes those outcomes entirely predictable. When a system structurally values dogma over humanity, when it equips its followers with a divine warrant that overrides conscience, violence and institutional cover-ups are not anomalies. They are the logical, intended results of the system functioning exactly as designed.
The crisis, then, is our own intellectual surrender.
Yes. The crisis is that we are, as Hitchens so brilliantly put it, forging manacles for our own minds. We are voluntarily submitting to a celestial dictatorship that doesn't actually exist. The shift in visibility happens when you stop looking at the spiritual marketing and start analyzing the institutional machinery.
And when you finally do that, you realize that the ongoing struggle for secularism, for scientific literacy, for the strict separation of church and state, it isn't just about political policy. It is about defending the basic freedom of the human mind.
It's about rejecting the coercive gift of servitude and claiming the fundamental right to define your own meaning, your own morality, and your own life.
Crisis in Perception examines how systems shape belief and how better tools help us see clearly. This project is free and publicly accessible. If you'd like to support the time, tools, and research behind Crisis in Perception, you can become a supporter on Patreon. For a shorter visual overview of this topic, see the mini explainer link in the description. If you enjoy this kind of systems-level analysis, please like, subscribe, and comment with books or topics you'd like us to explore next.